Hello there. We're going to take advantage of this beautiful sunny day to also make a whole wheat rolled oat bread. And so we're going to start this bread with a sponge. A sponge is a different way of making a yeasted bread. The activity of the yeast within the sponge creates a lot of fermentation and it gives you a really nice light loaf. It takes a little bit longer because you have to let the sponge rise as well as the dough. So I have three cups of water. This is going to make 2 loaves of our whole wheat rolled oat bread. I'm going to add in 1/3 cup of honey from our hives. A little bit of crystallized honey in there, but that won't hurt it. 2 packages of yeast, or about 4½ teaspoons. Two cups of white flour to develop our gluten. And you can use all whole wheat if you prefer, and then 1 cup of whole wheat flour. This is just going to make a sponge. It's going to be really soupy. And we're going to set this covered in a warm place and just let it do its thing. Let it ferment and bubble up. All right, so we know it's really well incorporated. We've given it a good stir to start that gluten. Scrape down the sides a little bit. All right, we're just going to give this a cover. And we're going to put this in a warm place for about 1½ hours. I've turned my oven on to 170 and then turned it off. That creates a nice environment for the yeast to begin working. Hi there, we're back with our whole wheat rolled oat bread. We're going to take a look and see how the sponge is doing. Oh yes, probably could have used a little bit bigger bowl. You can see that sponge has risen to almost more than double. So we're going to stir that sponge down. I do have a larger bowl standing by in case I look at this and think, maybe I need a bigger bowl. But that's stirred down to a much smaller volume. I'm going to go ahead and scrape the sides down. Nice. It's very springy. So this is considered the first rise for this loaf of bread. All right, we're going to add our oats and our salt. 1/3 cup of oil. Stir that in. And then we're going to add just enough whole wheat flour to make a soft dough. It smells like honey because there's honey in the sponge. All right, so it's bubbling away. It really wants to rise. There's about 1 cup of whole wheat flour. You see that I kind of fold the dough over and over to incorporate the flour. All right. There's a 2nd cup of flour. I'm guessing we're going to need more than 2 cups. Yep. You'll notice that this particular dough, after it's risen as a sponge and had other things incorporated, is almost stringy. That's the gluten developing. All right. So pull out our bag of whole wheat flour and keep adding. About 1/2 cup at a time. And when it gets too much to stir with a spoon, we'll get in there with our hands. This dough is going to have 3 more risings, 2 in the bowl, and then 1 in the loaf pans. It's a nice mass of dough. I would say it's just about time to get in there with my hands and see how it feels. Another 1/2 cup of flour. So we're up to 3½ cups. This dough has a different feel also than some of our other breads. Very springy, but you can feel the oats in it, which gives it a little bit of a granular feel. I really like adding oats to bread. I think it helps with the chew, and it gives you that heart-healthy oat bran. Oh yeah, this is coming together nicely. Now I'm going to go down to sprinkles. Still feeling some wet. Whole wheat bread needs a lot of kneading to develop the gluten in the whole wheat flour. And the dough can be a little bit wetter than bread that's made with all white flour. I think the hardest part of making whole wheat bread is baking it long enough so that that moisture bakes out and you don't get a soggy loaf. You can almost see that bread spring back, that dough spring back when I stop. It springs back. All right, that feels pretty good. That's a nice batch of dough. I'm going to put it in my greased pan, turn it around to pick up some of that Crisco, and then just form it into a ball. We're going to cover it, put it in that warm oven that's been heated to 170 and then turned off for about, I'm going to set the timer for about 40 minutes, and we'll check it then. So our whole wheat rolled oat bread has been rising in the bowl for about an hour, maybe a little bit less. Let's see how it's doing. So you can see it's taken up just about the whole bowl. I'm going to do the finger test. You can see that it didn't spring back. It pretty much stayed punched in. So I'm going to just sprinkle a little flour over it here. It was our timer telling us that it was time to check the bread, but my spider sense already told me to do that. So I'm punching it down, just kind of folding over the edges, adding a little flour if I need to. Just punching all the air out of it. You can feel that it's got a really nice spring to it. And I'm just gonna roll it over so it's a bowl, fits in the bowl as a nice ball again. We'll cover it up and we'll put it back in that pre-warmed oven for about, I'm going to check it after a half hour. I'm guessing because it's a nice sunny day that this is going to rise pretty quickly. The recipe called for a whole hour for it to rise. I don't think it's going to take that long. We don't want it to over rise, so we want that to pretty much double in size, which means it's going to just about fill to the top of the bowl. So once it rises again, we'll be able to put it in the pans to rise. Okay, so we're taking a look at our whole wheat rolled oat bread. This is the third rising, so it rose once as a sponge. It rose twice in the bowl, and you can see if I push my fingers down, the holes just stay there. It doesn't bounce back. So we're gonna squish all the air out of this. We're gonna take it out of the bowl, put it on a floured pastry cloth or on your countertop, and I've got a little bit of flour sprinkled on there. And we're just gonna briefly knead this. Make sure there's no sticky spots. So my friend Bernie, who took time out of her life and her 9 children and her full-time job to teach me how to make bread, said that bread made with love would always be good. And I think those are words to live by. All right, we've got a nice big healthy loaf of bread. I'm going to whack it right in 2. We could do this in rounds and put this on a cookie sheet, but I'm going to choose to put this into bread pans. So I don't wash my bread pans. I find that if I wash my bread pans, the bread sticks. So I've cut some Teflon pads to fit down into my bread pans, and that keeps the bottoms fairly clean, and I don't worry about the ends. So we're gonna shape these into logs and put them into the bread pans to rise for their very last rising. You want the top to be fairly smooth, so you can tuck it under, roll it up until you have a nice loaf. All right. Just learning from my dad too. He just always used to tuck his bread right in next to the side of the bread pan. And you can either do some slashes across the side or just do nice 3 pokes right down in. So there we have our first loaf of bread. Why poke it? Well, my dad poked it because his mother poked it. I asked a Mennonite friend who also poked her bread why she poked her bread. She said her mother told her that poking the bread let the bad air out. In doing some research, I found that there's actually a reason why you do poke the bread. That's to let any excess steam out, especially for whole wheat bread, because you don't want the middle to be soggy. So however you choose to shape your bread, do so and tuck it into your pans. You can weigh the dough to make sure that you've got approximately the same amount in each pan, or you can just eyeball it. At this point, you can brush the loaves with egg white or with butter, or you can just leave them as they are. We're going to put these, we don't have to cover them, we're going to put these in a warm place to rise until they are just about double or above the pan, and then we'll check back in. Okay, here's our whole wheat bread that's rising in the pans. I want to just give you an idea of how big it needs to be before you put it into the oven. These are going to rise more in the oven, so we don't want them to be too big, but just rising above the edge of the pan is perfect. You can see our rye bread there in the background already almost gone. One loaf is almost gone. All right, so we're going to slide these into the oven. We're going to let them bake for 50 to 70 minutes, which is a really long time at 350. My oven is all up to temperature, but whole wheat bread takes a long time to bake the middle. We want to make sure the middle is not doughy. So here is our whole wheat oat bread. It's got a nice dark crust on it. It was in the oven for an hour. I'd rather err on the side of baking it a little too long than not baking it long enough, because there's nothing worse than bread that's soggy on the inside. Let's take a look at the bottom and see if we can tell if it's done. Ooh, nice crust. So I'm going to give this bread a thump. Let's hear what it sounds like. Yep, that's that hollow sound that tells you that the bread is done. We're going to let these loaves cool before we cut into them, because I think we'll get a better idea of what the crumb looks like after it's cool. So if you notice what I just did, one of the things you can do if you're having trouble getting your bread loaves out of the pan is to give it a shake or to give it a twist. You can go around the outside with a knife and then just give it a shake or give it a twist, and it should pop right out. We'll go ahead and test this one too, just because I like the sound. Nice and hollow. So there we go. We're going to let those cool on a rack, and then we'll cut them open and see what they look like inside. Okay, this is our whole wheat rolled oat bread. It's cool now. We're going to give it a slice and see what it looks like inside. Oh, very nice. It's done. It's not gummy in the middle at all. It's got a nice crunchy thick crust. I think this is going to make some really wonderful toast. Let's see what it tastes like. That's a nice whole wheat bread recipe. Good for sandwiches, good for toast, especially maybe a grilled cheese sandwich.